Now I want to push this a little further. Now let's think, we talked about disintermediation in general. Now let's think more broadly of what can we actually use the tokens for. And it goes to the question of what incentives can you provide? So the first question that we have to ask ourselves then is, what purpose does the token have? What does it want to do? And then you want to know what is the overarching role that this token then plays with that particular purpose? And then finally is, what are the activities that the token incentivizes? If we think of tokens as incentives. So you can start, for instance, about a purpose such as bootstrapping and enriching user engagement. So what you want to do is you want to have this token so that people are keen on getting that token and are willing to do something for it. So this is the bootstrapping. You want to draw users into your ecosystem. And so what role does the token play? Well, it could be the right to a product or service, to some special functionality. So really, thinking about these utility tokens that you have, but you just get a particular service. But you want to, in a platform, in particular, you want to push this one step further. You want to encourage future usage. You want to encourage participation, maybe voting on some certain topics. You want to encourage distribution. You want to encourage networking and connections. So this is one of the ways how you can try to design your token. Then there's a lot of transaction-based ones, right? So you can have transactions directly, you can have the distribution of some form of payments of a common enterprise, or you can create some form of internal economy within the platform. The role that the token plays in any of these transactions is some form of internal currency within the platform to enable the value exchange. And then what it tries to incentivize is that there are payments, transaction units, that there is a profit and benefit sharing, or that there is some form of rewards for work and for the creation of work. But keep in mind, this is everything that is sort of platform intrinsic. It is like, using Canadian Tire money for people to engage in Canadian Tire, to do things in Canadian Tire. It's essentially literally somebody who works at Canadian Tire and gets paid in Canadian Tire tokens that they can trade with other customers to buy items there so that they can do something else. So this is essentially the idea that we have. This is a very hard problem to crack if you think about why you need to have an internal token as opposed to some external type of money. So in your particular platform. But I think these are absolutely critical questions if you want to design a token and say, hey, I want to do X and I want to build X and here's why I want to use a token for it. You need to think really hard about what it is that you're looking for. And in particular, the part which you have to be very careful about are platform incentives. So now, in a very broad sense, economists think about interaction in some form of contracts. And there are essentially, two types of contracts. There are complete contracts, where all the terms of the contract can be entirely specified and all contingencies can be specified. Now, from a legal perspective, that's quite difficult, but let's just go with the idea that we can do this. Now, the big problem that you often have is that, outcomes need to be contractable. So it means we have to be able to say, actually, if X happens, then Y will happen. And in most cases, we leave these things vague and we leave them open because we just don't know anything that can happen. So most of the contracts in the world are incomplete. And it is often also very difficult to enforce the contracts. Now, even if they are, so now what the blockchain can do, of course, is it can potentially expand the set of contracts that we can completely describe, right? Because basically we write a contract, put it into a piece of code, and then for a very large number of outcomes, we can write this down the right way. So this is basically the background here. There's a lot of ado about this, but this is essentially the idea of what economists think about platforms. So now, but if we want to think about platform incentives, generally speaking, so the question that you have to ask yourself is, you want to incentivize something. So what is it that the platform needs people to do? So, and then so there's basically two questions that you have to ask yourself at that point. Is it worth for me, meaning the person who wants to engage with the platform, to engage at all? So we refer to this as economists as the participation constraint, but it is an extremely critical component while thinking about user engagement. And then the second thing is, okay, so now that maybe we're able to get people to use my platform, do you also want to incentivize the right behavior in the sense of the platform the action that the platform desires the users to do has to be, so that the users want to do has to be also the best for the platform. In other words, you don't want that the customer does something which is not in the best interest of the platform. So you have to provide the incentives to the user to be doing exactly that. And that's not easy, and it can be very expensive to do at times. And importantly, if we think about not an automated system, but actually real users and real people using this platform, incentives sometimes have very strange side effects. So there's a very nice book by two economists called Freakonomics. So read that if you want to know all the things that could possibly go wrong with incentives. Now, then even if we have figured out what it is that we want people to do, we still have to answer and think about, is there actually a suitable performance metric? So can we actually measure the desired outcome or the desired behavior so that we can properly incentivize this? This is really quite difficult. And in particular, what it does is that this performance metric has to be aligned with the long run goal of the platform, and it must be also under the control of the participant. So why is that? Why does the participant want to do it? Well, because if the participant wants to get it as a reward, if he wants to take the right desired action, in many cases, then they need to have control over it. So, example, if you have a low-ranked employee in a firm, a janitor, you don't want to pay that janitor in equity of the firm because the actions of the janitor does not have control over the well-being of the firm. And since so if you want, and put it differently, you want to incentivize the janitor to do the right thing. Okay, so it means keep the floors clean in the main lobby, let's say, right? Now, you cannot do this by issuing equity to that janitor. Why? Well, because whether or not the floor is clean in the lobby has an absolutely negligible effect on the equity of the firm. So this incentive that you give him in terms of, hey, if the firm does well and if you do your job well, then you get you get paid more. Your equity stake is more. Is not going to work like that, right? It's just so this action of cleaning the floor is just not important enough for the value of the firm. So now the problem is that many utility tokens fail their test because simply the value of the utility token. So the idea is you behave well and therefore the utility token has value is just too much out of the control of a particular participant. So using utility tokens and the value intrinsically, so in particular tokens that appreciate in value for platform success, is a very bad way to incentivize people. It's just not enough under their control. And by the way, equity tokens could fail here too. So if you do this, it has to be something concrete that gives you concrete value. And designing those things is really difficult. So in other words, so this slide is a little bit of a careful note, is if you want to design your token incentives, you have to be very careful that it is something, when you give somebody incentive, that it actually is something that the person benefits from and has under their control so that the action actually matters. All right, not sure why this is here. So this is one more look at business models. So this is about platform tokens and the usage on platforms. Now, I put the campus model for Facebook up because, Facebook essentially is a platform of user interaction. Now, Facebook has, key partners of content partner, advertising agencies, cost structures, of course, data costs, research and development, so on. Now, the revenue streams are interesting because, the user experience is free, but advertising revenues are certain there and there's some form of payments. And then the customers are marketers, developers, or internet users, right? Because so the people want to use the platform, but also marketers who are on the other side. So those are because Facebook creates a platform and therefore a two-sided market. So now I don't want to go through all the details for Facebook, but I want you to think about when you want to build a business, how does a business campus look like for a blockchain firm? And in order to do that, I have to talk briefly about the buildup of the technology. Now, blockchain technology can be thought of, and this is another slide that I pulled off the web, in 5 different layers. You have first the infrastructure layer. Then you have now the question is, can the infrastructure layer, is that something, if you want to build a platform firm, if you want to build a platform, is that anything that is relevant for you? I would say no, because once you build something on top of an existing blockchain, you don't want to be bothered with the mining activities, the network, the visualization, all that. The next question is the network layer, right? So that's basically the questions of, the execution environment, the peer-to-peer environment and all that. Is that something that you as a blockchain firm or an entity that wants to create a service on the blockchain wants to deal with? The answer is usually no. It's also not yours. Then comes the protocol layer. So that is where you ask the consensus methods, network participation, and so on and so forth. And that's where it gets a little tricky, because you may actually be some entity that wants to create something on a side chain, on a permission portion of the blockchain. So on that layer, you may or may not want to participate as your platform. And then you come the big part, which are services and optional components. So these are things that you build, where you create, particular wallets, data feeds, and so on and so forth. And so that's certainly something that you want to be part of. And then now, if you want to build a platform, well, you can argue that the application layer is maybe not what you're after, but you can also think about a blockchain entity as being one that actually creates a decentralized application. So, depending on what business idea you have, these may all apply. Right. So what it's important to understand, if we now go to the business canvas, about which of these layers you want to interact with. So that's the first question you have to ask. Why is that important? Well, because it affects the way of your key stakeholders and key partners. So now I'm actually changed the words, by the way, for key partners to also key stakeholders, because people, a platform is slightly different because especially a self-propelled platform is people, maybe stakeholders, and you need to, communicate with them in your business activities. So what are the activities? You could run dApps, you can run the ecosystem, and you have the development of the ecosystem. What are the resources that you need? Usually you need an existing blockchain with a mining infrastructure, maybe also an existing ecosystem if you want to build a decentralized application. Cost structure is you need to pay for the development. You may need to market your platform. You have to pay miners. You have to market the tokens if you want to use them, and you need to have some ongoing R&D. Your customers will be either dApp users or dApp developers, depending on which level you're trying to interact. Now there's the question of how can you get customer relationships. Now, there could be a lot of cross-fertilization between developers who could be customers, who could be dApp developers, or could be developers who prepare the network so that dApps can be developed. And the channels, how do you reach people? Well, in the blockchain world, you go to meetups and conventions, but you can also use internet advertising. This is a difficult part to do. It's difficult to get the user base. So at this point, you need to be part of this ecosystem, but in the future, you may want to reach the average Joe, and then you face basically distribution problems just like any internet company. Revenue streams, usually you have token sales. So this is how you can get money. You may get money also on a perpetual basis. You may have hosting fees. Then there's a question of what other, your dApp may actually also have payments that, where basically the token sales essentially is the income that you create. And then finally, the part of the value proposition, well, that's obviously the idea, the part of what your business is about. What I'm getting at here, though, is this is essentially the way you have to think about the network if you think about a business model on a blockchain.